Morning, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing some of the events that surrounded what would be one of the most influential and amazing events, not only in the American Civil War, but also in American history. That was the incorporation of African Americans into the Union Army. In 1862, the governor of Massachusetts, Governor Andrew, began wanting to raise an actual African American troop regiment to help fight in the Civil War. And he actually spoke to the parents of a Union officer by the name of Robert Gould Shaw, talked to his parents because they were strong abolitionists and they were encouraging their son Robert to actually lead the troops. He was kind of reluctant at first because he was wondering if it'd be worth the time to try to raise and train a regiment that he seriously doubted would take action. And so what the governor decided to do was, in the raising of this particular regiment, the 54th and the 55th Massachusetts regiments, was that it was important that the men who were in the regiment initially were all freemen, men who were born free, not runaway slaves. And these were all men who were educated, men who had property, men who were merchants, men who had farms, men who put a great deal on the line to actually join this regiment. And it actually goes as far as to say that the 54th and the 55th Massachusetts regiments were some of the most highly educated regiments in either army. And so they began forming them in 1862. And Gould reluctantly took command of the regiment, of the 54th, and they began training them and working them and began preparing them. And they didn't actually see action until they went down to South Carolina outside of the defenses of Charleston and in James Island in July of 1863. This is shortly after Gettysburg and Vicksburg. And so they actually, the men themselves had so much to prove because, quite frankly, most Americans thought that African Americans could not be trusted to do what was right in those situations. As soon as they would come under heavy fire, that they all would just tuck tail and run. They wouldn't follow orders. They wouldn't do anything that they were supposed to do. And so the men of the 54th and 55th Massachusetts, and also of all the other regiments that would be formed, but I'm just focusing on these two today, had so much to do. They are under enormous pressure. They knew they represented everybody back home. They knew the fact that they were under the microscope. Any little thing they could have done wrong would have been greatly magnified. Oh, we knew they couldn't do it. So they were under the pressure to not only do it just as well, but to do it better and cleaner than all the other white regiments. There was no problems of any kind among the 54th and 55th Massachusetts regiments. And so in July 16th of 1863, they actually fought in a skirmish on James Island. And there they proved that they were willing to stand toe-to-toe with the Confederates. And they didn't buck and run. They actually helped save and prepare a way to save the other white regiments that were in the area. And later on that month, even though the regiment was severely exhausted, they were chosen to be part of the attack on Fort Wagner, which was another one of the defenses outlying of Charleston. And notwithstanding the how much they did attack the fort, they weren't able to take the fort because of a lot of different things with weather, lack of preparation. They were outnumbered, and quite frankly, Fort Wagner was an impregnable fortress. But they were able to charge and actually take part of the wall, and they showed pretty much to the world that day that they were able to not only stand toe-to-toe, but they were able to take the fight to the enemy, and they showed that they were equal, and they were able to actually prove that they were equals of the white soldiers that they fought alongside with. And Colonel Shaw actually fell with his men charging the fort. Now, what's supposed to happen is the sash that the officers wear shows that they're supposed to let the other side know that they have a fallen officer, and as part of military formality, they send the bodies either back home to their families, or they simply give them a proper military burial. Now, to the Confederates who were defending Fort Wagner, it was such a disgrace that a white officer was leading colored troops, quote unquote, that they chose to desecrate his body. They stripped him down to his underwear, paraded him through the actual fort, and then in a big mass grave they were digging, they threw him face down in the bottom of the pit and then buried him with his troops. And some captured Confederate troops in that area were asked where was done with Colonel Shaw's body, and they said he's buried with his N-words. So they did that as a way of trying to desecrate and to disgrace the Shaw and the Shaw family. But asking the Shaws after the fact, the Shaws were saying, in their own, putting my own words, that they were very proud that their son had done that. And they're very proud that their son had been buried with his men. So these are some of the events that would help show the world what African-American troops were made of. They went above and beyond. They fought valiantly throughout the war. There were many other African-American regiments, but I focused on these two specifically, largely because of their notoriety. So I'd invite you to read more up on this. There's a great deal more on this matter. So there you go.